Every empire that ever touched Central Europe tried to take the Alps. Every single one failed. The Romans stopped at the passes. Napoleon crossed them but never controlled them. Hitler surrounded Switzerland on all sides and left it alone. The Habsburgs spent 3 centuries trying to absorb it and watched it slip away instead. A small, landlocked country with no navy, no natural resources anyone desperately needed, no ocean access, no single dominant city. Surrounded by France, Germany, Austria, and Italy, at the crossroads of every major European conflict for 1,000 years, still independent, still neutral, still there. How does that happen? The answer starts not with diplomacy, not with luck, with terrain. Stand at the center of Switzerland and look in any direction. You cannot see more than a few kilometers before a mountain wall cuts off the view. The Alps are not a scenic backdrop. They are a military reality that has not changed in 10,000 years. Rivers run fast and cold between narrow valleys. Passes close with snow for months at a time. An army that does not know this terrain moves slowly, bleeds constantly, and starves before it arrives anywhere worth arriving at. But terrain alone does not stop empires. The Romans crossed the Alps. Hannibal crossed the Alps. The passes can be found. The mountains can be navigated. What terrain does is change the mathematics of conquest. And in Switzerland, the mathematics never worked in favor of the invader. This is where the story really begins. The communities that lived in the Alpine valleys were not rich. They had no gold, no spice routes running through their territory. The soil above the snowline produces almost nothing. What they had was self-sufficiency built over centuries of necessity, and an understanding of their own terrain that no outside army could match. And then one day, an outside power decided to test that. The Habsburgs in the late 13th century control a growing territory across Central Europe. They are expanding. They look at the Alpine valleys and see something useful. Not the mountains themselves, the passes through them. Whoever controls those passes controls the movement of goods and armies between Northern and Southern Europe. That is worth fighting for. So they move to take control. The communities of what will become Switzerland do not have professional armies. They do not have knights in the Habsburg sense. They have farmers, men who spend their lives in rough terrain, carrying heavy loads, reading weather and stone and ice. Men for whom the landscape is not an obstacle, but a home. And in a fight, that makes all the difference. The first decisive moment comes at Morgarten in the early 14th century. A Habsburg force moves through a narrow pass. It is not a battle. It is a lesson. The Swiss forces wait above the pass and use the terrain as a weapon. Rocks, halberds, the natural channeling of the valley that leaves an armored cavalry with nowhere to maneuver. The Habsburg force is not simply defeated, it is dismantled. Word of this travels. What makes Morgarten significant is not the scale. It is the implication. Heavy cavalry, the dominant military technology of medieval Europe, is not invincible. Not here. Not in this terrain. Not against men who understand the ground and choose the moment. The Swiss keep winning. At Laupen, at Sempach, at Naffels. Each time, the pattern repeats. A larger and better equipped force underestimates terrain, underestimates opponents, and pays for it. Each victory adds to a reputation, and reputation in medieval Europe is a military asset as real as any weapon. But here is the paradox. The victories make Switzerland more dangerous to attack. And more dangerous to attack means more valuable as an ally. And more valuable as an ally means the surrounding powers start looking at Switzerland not as a territory to conquer, but as a buffer they cannot afford to destabilize. The logic of European power politics over time begins to work in Switzerland's favor instead of against it. This does not mean the pressure stops. It shifts. The Burgundian Wars in the 15th century are the clearest example. Charles the Bold of Burgundy is building one of the most powerful states in Western Europe. He is wealthy, militarily aggressive, and looking to expand. He decides to confront the Swiss Confederacy directly. Charles has the most modern army in Europe at the time: artillery, professional soldiers, logistics that most powers cannot match. It does not matter. At Grandson, at Merton, at Nancy. The Swiss defeat him in 3 consecutive engagements. Charles the Bold dies at Nancy. His state collapses. The most powerful military force in Western Europe at the time runs into the Swiss and loses 3 times in less than 2 years. After this, nobody treats Switzerland lightly again. The Swiss themselves draw a conclusion from these wars that will shape their future. Their military effectiveness is an asset, a tradable asset. Swiss mercenaries begin serving in armies across Europe, including the armies of France, the papacy, and various Italian states. The Swiss Guard at the Vatican today is the last surviving trace of this system. This is the economic engine that keeps the Confederacy stable through the 16th and 17th centuries. Not natural resources, not trade routes, people, specifically trained fighters who know how to win in difficult terrain and how to maintain discipline in open battle. An empire that attacks Switzerland does not just fight the Swiss. It loses access to Swiss mercenaries. It makes an enemy of a country that other powers are paying to keep strong. The calculus of invasion keeps not adding up. But military effectiveness and mercenary income alone do not explain 300 years of neutrality that begins to crystallize in the 17th century. Something else happens. Something quieter and in some ways more consequential. Switzerland becomes useful as a neutral space in a way that nothing else in Europe can replicate. When France and the Habsburgs are at war, both sides need a place where they can communicate without the communication being treated as treason. When Protestant and Catholic powers are tearing each other apart in the 30 Years' War, someone needs to host negotiations, banking transactions, the movement of money and messages that keeps even warring states functioning. Switzerland, sitting between all of them, sharing cultures and languages with the French, the Germans, and the Italians simultaneously, becomes that place. Not because anyone planned it, because the geography and the political situation created a need, and Switzerland was positioned to fill it. The neutrality that begins as a practical military calculation becomes a diplomatic institution. By the Congress of Vienna in 1815, it is formally recognized by the major European powers. Switzerland is not just neutral. Its neutrality is guaranteed by everyone who might otherwise threaten it. The guarantors have just made it structurally impossible for any one of them to invade without turning every other guarantor into an enemy. Napoleon understands this better than almost anyone. He reorganizes Switzerland during his campaigns. He cannot ignore it and cannot easily absorb it. He imposes a new constitutional structure and moves on, leaving behind a more centralized Swiss state that will outlast his own empire by 200 years. The First World War, the Second World War, Switzerland mobilizes. Both times the Swiss army takes up positions. Both times the calculation for any potential invader is the same. The mountains, the prepared defenses, the cost in time and casualties. Against what? A country with no oil, no coal deposits worth seizing, no strategic coastline. And behind them, the certain knowledge that every other major power is watching to see who moves first. Hitler in particular draws up plans, Operation Tannenbaum. The German military assessment of what it would cost to take Switzerland concludes that the losses would be significant and the strategic gain minimal. Swiss industry is more useful to Germany as a trading partner than as a conquered territory bleeding German soldiers into Alpine positions. The invasion never happens. And this is the final logic that explains Switzerland. Not any single factor, the accumulation of them. Terrain that multiplies the cost of attack, a military tradition that makes the cost real, a political neutrality that makes the country more useful intact than conquered. languages, and cultural connections that give Switzerland ties to every surrounding power simultaneously. An economy built on services, finance, and precision manufacturing that functions only in stability and is destroyed by occupation. Every layer of protection reinforces every other layer. It did not happen by accident. It happened because over centuries the people in those valleys made consistent choices. The choice to resist the Habsburgs when resistance seemed impossible. The choice to build a confederacy rather than consolidate into a kingdom. The choice to offer neutrality as a service rather than waiting to be absorbed. None of those choices were obvious at the time. Each one was made under pressure with incomplete information by people who could not see what they were building. What they built was a country that the rest of Europe found easier to leave alone than to destroy. Some places survive because they are powerful. Some survive because they are remote. Switzerland survives because it made itself indispensable to the same powers that might have swallowed it. That is not a military strategy. It is something harder to learn and harder to replicate. It is a civilization strategy, and it is still working.